Alright guys, we're doing a DCT install, Rubicon DCT. So it's got the electric shift and the automatic mode. The drive shaft and everything is just like a foot shift or any of the rest of them. We got another video that shows everything on the foot shift, but basically you got your bracket up here on your front diff. It's got to come off. It's got a 14mm bolt there, two 12s that go through here into the frame, and then you got a 14mm right there on the bottom of the diff. All your new body styles are like this. The old body style is a little it's similar, it's a little different. Basically everything that holds your front disc got to come loose, because the front disc got to slide forward to release the drive shaft. Here, these boots, we already took them loose, but these boots are up here. You got to take those loose so it'll allow this is basically like a sleeve, this coupling here, and it's spring loaded, and it's got to be able to retract to be able to come off your output shaft here, because this has got to come out of the way. This cover, front cover's coming off, and on these DCTs they have a spacer, what they call a spacer here, that's between the cover and the actual engine cases. So the foot shifts and the regular ESs don't have this spacer, so that's the extra part. When we get closer, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Other than that, basically get the front diff unbolted so you can slide all this forward, and you've got I believe it was 4 connections up here you have to take loose. One there, your shift motor, and then there's 2 on the other side over here. There's 4 of them all together. Take all those loose, get them out of the way. Alright, we've got the bolts out of the ES motor and the little ES cover here, and show y'all how this kind of comes apart, because there's some small gears inside of here. This has just got an O-ring, kind of seals it up. This is your emergency shifter shaft here. You put an 8mm wrench on that to shift it manually. Somebody's put somebody's been in the front of this thing before, I can tell by looking at the Permatex. See if we can bunt this loose. I went behind that ear there to kind of get it loose, and there's another one on this side, on the bottom here, little ear. Alright. So that little gear, it fell out of place, but it goes right there, like that. And when that shift motor, when it's put in, the little splines on here is what drives that little small gear right there. And you can kind of see how that thing works. Basically, when it shifts, it spins, that shift motor spins that gear, and all that pivots, and that actually spins the shift shaft. So all this has got to go back in. It's got to go in a certain way. This, I call it a V-shaped gear, because it's got a V shape to it. It's got a front and a back, and there's a witness mark on there, or it's actually got a P7 but there's a front and a back to this thing. And I believe one side's got a shoulder. I don't know if these are like that or not. The 1000s have an offset to them. Alright, anyway, your marking, I don't know if they all say that or not, P7 is what this one has, but that mark's going to face out, just remember that. And some of these are keyed. It'll only go on there a certain way. I'm not sure if these are like that or not. But basically when that thing goes back together, it's got to be centered up. It's supposed to be centered up with this gear here. You can't have it one way or the other. It's got to be centered up. These other two round ones here, they pretty much, you see how they, just pay attention to how they come apart, but you can't really put them in backwards. It won't go together but one way basically. I was going to see, because I think this thing will go on different ways. I think you can force it on, maybe, but it don't really act like it wants to go on right there. So it's basically made to only go on the spline in a certain position. So if you've got to force it on, it's not in the right indexing. It should just kind of fall right on like that right there. So it can only go on one way. Just remember that. Clamp these coolant lines and take them loose, and then we can drain. Take this bottom bolt right here. It's got a copper washer on it. That's how you drain your water pump. That'll drain all the coolant that's in the water pump, and like in your top end, sitting in the top end, that's how you drain it out. We'll drain that, take these lines loose, and we'll go ahead and take all these bolts out on the front cover, and the front cover will be ready to come off at that point. Alright guys, we got the auto+ES stuff out of the way, the little gears and everything. You don't have to mess with any of these bolts right here. This is the valve body. You don't have to take any of this apart. There's gaskets and stuff in here if you do take it apart. There's a couple, like a metal gasket and stuff in here, but you don't have to mess with any of this. So the only bolts you got to take loose are the ones right here around the outside cover. You get all of those bolts out around the outside cover, and once you get the cover off, there's one bolt left right here under the dipstick. That's actually the only bolt that's going to be holding the spacer here, the cover spacer to the actual cases. But you want to leave that bolt in, because if you take it out now and you go to try to pull the front cover, it's going to try to pull the spacer with it. You don't want to do that. You want to separate these first and get the cover off. Then you can take this bolt out and pull the spacer off. We got the coolant hoses. I always just clamp them off with some vice grips. Just kind of be careful that you don't mess the hose up. We got the other side clamped off over there too. That keeps you from having to drain all the coolant out of the machine. You'll lose some coolant, whatever's actually in the engine, in the top end and the water pump, but you won't have to replace all of it. So, but we've got all the bolts out. We're getting ready to pull this cover off now. I always just kind of hit the sides of the cover just to kind of jar it loose. See, it's coming apart there now. Need you have your bucket or something, because you're going to lose some oil. We've already drained the oil out of this thing, by the way. But there's going to be a little bit sitting in that cover in the front. Alright, the cover's ready to come off. You just pull it straight off, straight out. come out. I always come out the right side. Seems to be easier to come out the right side with your cover. There's a 27 millimeter nut here and on the centrifugal clutch. Honda calls this a starting clutch. Centrifugal, same thing. You gotta pull that nut. We're gonna use the puller to pull the centrifugal clutch off, the special puller. And then we'll take this nut off. And at that point, we can go ahead and take this last bolt out. This is the only bolt now that's actually holding this spacer to the case. So we'll take that bolt out and we'll pull this spacer off, and we'll go ahead and swap our hub out with the bigger gear on it. And we've got to grind a couple of spots inside of the spacer here to clear that bigger gear up here on the top side. And then there's a spot down here right above the output shaft you have to grind. So we're going to get all that apart now. Alright, I went ahead and broke the nuts loose. We took the nuts off, 27 millimeter. Got this special puller here that we sell. It threads onto this backing plate. You can't really see it, but anyway, it's the backing plate that these shoes and everything mounts to in this clutch assembly. There's threads on that backing plate, and that's the proper way to pull this drum off. Some people try to use like a 2-jaw or 3-jaw puller and actually try to pull on the drum. That's not the correct way to do it. I mean, you can risk messing up the drum or warping it or something, or it's just not really a good way of doing it. You're really supposed to pull on the backing plate. The backing plate's what's actually pressed onto the crankshaft, not the drum. The drum's just kind of floating on there. Use the right puller. There's a washer behind both of those nuts. 27 millimeter nut here and over here. So make sure you pull the washer off also, because that can kind of interfere with the when you go to try to pull this clutch off. I always just run this on by hand where it snugs there right there, and I'll just back it off about 1/8 of a turn or so, and it'll allow you to get the puller. It'll keep the puller from trying to kind of seize up on the clutch. Just makes it easier to get it back off. I just got an adjustable wrench here and a ratchet wrench. You just want to hold the body of the puller stationary, and then you're going to basically tighten up on this bolt here. And what it's doing is it's pulling that backing plate is spline and got a press fit onto the crankshaft. This is actually pulling that backing plate loose. Alright, see, it's free right there. See that? So now, see how I can just kind of screw my puller right back off because I didn't cinch it down all the way. And this is ready to just kind of slide right off of here. You got a spline. You got a spline inside of here on this backing plate, which is a press fit onto this spline on the crank. You set this to the side. There's your drive gear. Go ahead and pull that off. There's a washer behind it. You leave this washer out. You won't put that washer back in with the reduction. The reduction's designed to not run the washer. At this point, you can pull. Go ahead and pull that out because it's a separate piece. That's I call it a drive plate. There's a washer right there, like a press washer that sits inside of it. you can, at this point, you can pull this clutch out of here. It'll clear. You see how it clears the spacer? So that'll clear and come out. But when you go to put the reduction hub in with the bigger gear, it's going to be hanging way out here. And I have some people thinking, you know, that they got sent the wrong parts, whatever. They don't realize that you've actually got to take the spacer off. Even though the factory one will slide past it, the reductions will not. So that just kind of slides off. So now we're ready. We're going to go ahead and take that bolt out now and get this spacer assembly off of here. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and show you how much this this is the reduction hub with the bigger gear on it. I'll go ahead and show you how much it interferes with the spacer here. This is where people kind of get confused. So you see how much it's actually overlapping the gasket surface of the spacer. That's how much bigger it is. This is the 40% we're doing. It's technically a 43, we call it a 40. People that get to this point, they don't realize they have to take the spacer off, and they think they've got the wrong part or whatever. They've got the grind here, and obviously something's not right. So that's why you actually have to take the spacer off to actually assemble it with the reduction. Alright, I went ahead and slid the clutch hub in here with the with that rear clutch pack in place. That way it gets the offset of the gear and everything like it's supposed to be, like it will be when everything's assembled, because there's a thrust washer inside of here and everything. If you just try to put the clutch hub on without the clutch pack, it's going to sit a little too far back. So I went ahead and ground the spacer cover out where you need to grind at. So on the top side here, this is the top of that's how your spacer sits on there. Alright, your top 3 holes here, that middle hole, that hump inside of there, you got to grind that some. And this hump here right above the output shaft, we went ahead and pulled that seal out too. You want to put a new seal in here, but you don't want to do it until you get everything assembled, then slide the seal over the output shaft into the spacer. If you try to put the seal in here first and then put your spacer on, 9 times out of 10 it'll catch, the lip of the seal will catch on your output shaft groove here when you're kind of trying to put it all together, and it'll pop that spring out of that seal, and it's just kind of a pain in the butt. So you're better off just leaving it out till you get everything put back together, then slide the seal in place. This bolt hole right above the output shaft here, that's the other spot where you have to grind the flat right in there. You'll have to probably grind some and check it. You may have to, you know, do it 3 or 4 times before you get enough, but we're gonna go ahead and slide this on and see how we look. What have I got going on here? Oh, oil pump turn. Oil pump's got a little flat drive there, got the counterbalancer in there. That's what drives the oil pump on these. So you got to make sure it's lined up with that slot. There we go. Get this all the way back, or as far back as it'll go. Alright, so I'm already hitting. See how I can't turn it? So I've got to grind. Okay, it looks like I'm good on top. I'm good on top. I've got to grind on my bottom hole here, right above the output shaft a little bit more. Pretty sure we got it this time. See how much I had to end up grinding it there. It ain't much. And on the top side, right across there, on that middle bolt hole across the top. You'll be able to tell when you put it in there where it's hitting at. We're gonna check it one more time. I think we're good though. Like we're clear. Make sure we get the spacer all the way up in place. Alright, spacer's all the way back right there. Alright, I'm just going to clean everything up, clean the old gasket maker off of the spacer here where the cover makes to it. Get all the old gasket maker off. Make sure your dowels are in place and your O-rings and stuff. There's a gasket on the back side of the spacer, in between the spacer and the case. The gaskets, I've never really had one tear. I mean, you can technically reuse it. Just clean it good with brake cleaner and just dab you a little bit of motor seal on it and stick it back together. Or, I mean, the correct way to do it is put a new gasket on it. But those factory Honda green gaskets are a pain in the tail to get off. That's up to you. So we're just going to take everything, clean everything, get ready to reassemble final assembly. We'll go ahead and get our clutch pack and our O-rings. There's two O-rings I'll mention that goes on your hub here in between the clutch pack and the hub to seal up. There's two O-rings on each side of the gear. Two over here and two on the back. We send the new O-rings with the kit, so just make sure you put those on and put some oil on them before you put the actual clutch pack on here for your final assembly. That's the main thing that you don't need to forget. Alright, we're putting this thing back together. Went ahead and got the clutch all assembled, the clutch hub. There is an offset. There's a steel plate on the outside of this hub, and it's got the word out, O-U-T, stamped on it, which means it faces out away from the engine. And there's an offset. The factory gear doesn't have this offset, but the reduction does for clearance purposes, to help with clearance inside that cover spacer. The reduction gear is offset back toward the engine some compared to the stock gear. You'll notice that. This is the stock hub here, but see, it's got out stamped into it. So, and it'll be the same way with the reduction hub. That side will face out when it's inside the engine, and you can see the compare the offset here I was talking about. How the stock gear doesn't have, you know, the offset to it that the reduction gear has. See the aluminum on the back of this factory hub, this aluminum plate, how it's kind of sticks out. You don't see it on the reduction because it's tucked up into the gear because of that offset. So there is a front and a back to it. Steel plate faces out. Also, I don't know if I explained it earlier, I don't think I did, but these clutch packs, they have like just a, it ain't even really a press fit. It's really just the O-ring that kind of gives it a little tight fit onto the hub. But this whole clutch pack, you don't disassemble it. You'll see a snap ring around here. You don't mess with any of that. You don't disassemble the pack. The clutch drum itself will come off of the hub. Normally you can kind of pull them off by hand. If not, you can go in between there and kind of pry it, and it'll kind of pop loose. You can put the DCT clutch, you know, you got to have it back in place before you put the spacer on, but you've got to wait. You can't put the starting clutch, the centrifugal clutch, on till after you get the spacer on, so just remember that. This clutch first, spacer cover, then your centrifugal clutch. And on these big nuts, they've got a spot where you have to stake them with a punch to lock it in place. Both of them do. It's got a little cutout where you stake the nut and kind of lock it. Now we're ready for the front cover to go back on. Don't forget you got O-rings for your water jackets and your dowels. You got alignment dowels. Make sure everything's in place, and you've got O-rings on your oil pump. Your oil pump ports and stuff. So there's an O-ring here. Make sure it's in place. You always want your O-rings on the dowel. You don't never want to leave. Sometimes when you take it apart, the O-ring will stay in the hole that this fits into. You always want to take the O-ring out and put it on the dowel, because you can cut. If you try to put it together with the O-ring in the hole, it'll actually try to cut the O-ring if you're not careful. So always put your O-rings on the metal dowel itself when you're putting it back together. There's another alignment dowel here. So we're getting ready to stick the front cover back on. At this point, you're pretty much just putting it back together the way you took it apart. Alright, we got the engine buttoned up. Just fired it up. Put some oil in it. Made sure everything didn't have any bad, weird sounds. But yeah, you pretty much just put it back together like you took it apart. Put your new seal in after you get, and then put your O-ring back on. You have to take that O-ring off when you're messing with the seal, because it'll interfere with the seal. So you actually take it off. The only other thing I've run into on these DCTs, and I guess it's because the way the transmission shaft hangs out so far, it's actually got a support bearing in the front cover like the crankshaft does. You'll go to put the front cover back on, and it'll go on up until about I'd say maybe 3/4 of an inch, and it'll act like it don't want to go all the way on. What I normally have to do, and I've had to do this with, I'd say probably 90% of these DCTs, is I'll turn the ignition on. I'll have the cover up there, and I'll kind of put pressure on it with my hand. I'll turn the ignition on. I'll kind of bump the starter a couple times, and normally the cover at that point, it'll kind of fall into place. But I think what it is just where that transmission shaft hangs out so far, and then the crankshaft, you know, sticks out. I think there's just enough run out, you know, in between those two shafts that they don't want to both line up into the cover just right. Sometimes you don't want to crank it, you just want to kind of bump the starter just enough to turn the, you know, spin the engine over a little bit, and that cover, it'll just kind of fall into place. You shouldn't have to force the covers on at all. Other than that, your electrical connections, these are the four I was talking about earlier. You've got two here, you got one on your shift motor, and then you've got a, I believe it's a oil pressure sensor or an oil temp sensor over there on the bottom. Or it could just be an oil level sensor. I'm not sure about that. So now you're ready to get the front drive shaft back in. Get the front diff bolted back into place and button it up. Don't forget your oil. These DCTs, they take 4 liters of oil. They take an extra liter over like the foot shifts and the regular ES machines. 4 liters. And these call for 10W30 instead of 10W40, like the foot shifts do. And don't forget to top your coolant off. And if you clamped your hoses like I do, don't forget to take your clamps off before you test ride it or whatever, because it'll run hot. I always like to test ride it, make sure I don't have any leaks before I put the skid pan back on and everything. Then you can get all your plastics back on it. Good to go.